Okay, so there's currently a planning application in to build a large tower block of 21 stories on Manor Road next to West Ealing's new Crossrail station. What's being offered on this tiny site is 144 flats, predominantly 1 to 2 bedroom flats with very little outside space and tiny balconies overlooking a noisy, busy railway line. 65% of these flats will be shared ownership. The other 35% will be London Living Rent, which is a scheme exclusively aimed at middle income earners who will eventually buy their flats. What shared ownership promises is almost magical, a route to owning a home for people on low incomes in high housing cost areas. Shared ownership is offered as a way of allowing people on lower incomes to move in now and pay later. So with me now, we have 2 local residents, Adam and Sophie. They both live in a shared ownership property in Ealing, not together, I just want to add. They live in 2 separate shared ownership properties. We also have Dr. Gerald Power from local campaign group Stop the Towers and the Drayton Community Association. So first of all, Sophie, you live in a shared ownership flat. So what made you want to get onto that scheme?
So I was renting a flat in Ealing previously, and as you can imagine, paying extortionate rent. And actually just thought to myself, well, I can either keep paying this or I can actually pay but own a percentage of a property and I suppose get on the housing ladder. Ealing is and was and is where I wanted to live, and on my own I simply couldn't afford it. So shared ownership gave me that opportunity. So that was the main reason.
So you couldn't have afforded a flat anywhere else in the area for that price? Any kind of similar size flat for a decent price?
Unfortunately not. I'd like to say that I could have, but no, I couldn't afford a 1-bedroom flat on my own. Kind of, at the time, the average 1 bed, I think at the time was 300k, for example, and I simply couldn't do it on my own. No.
Okay, so basically that sounds like a great deal for you. So you get a flat in an area you like, and you got a great deal is you can split the payments into rent, stroke, and mortgage. So
Yes.
a bit like the endowment mortgage of the 80s. So how much of your property do you currently? Well, did you start off with?
So I started at 40%, which I think is quite the common percentage. So I basically paid mortgage on the 40% of the market value of the property, and then 60% on rent. Yeah.
The mortgage, can I just ask, was that a fixed rate mortgage was offered through the deal, or was it a mortgage you had to apply for through the normal kind of routes?
Yeah, it's the normal route. So basically with the scheme that I went on to, they had financial advisors, and then you just go through the normal route of you basically applying and doing it all yourself.
Okay, right. So so how much of your property do you own now, if you don't mind me asking?
No, not at all. So fortunately, I now own 100%, but I would say that took me about 4 to 5 years to be in that position to do that.
Okay, so when you want to buy another share of your property, how does that work? So you say, I'm not going to ask you how much you paid for your property because I don't want you to give that information away. But say, for example, you paid £250,000 and you owned 40% of it. When you wanted to buy, what's it called, staircasing?
Yes, yeah.
When you wanted to buy another percentage, tell me how you'd go about doing that.
So every single time you staircase, it's like the first time you bought the first part of it. So basically you have to instruct a solicitor, obviously pay the solicitor fees. The financial advisor got back on board again. You have to have the property evaluated. So every single time you want to staircase, you hope that the market value hasn't gone up too much, because if they value it higher, then your new mortgage will be based on the higher rate rather than the original rate. So that's difficult. And you've got to pay stamp duty each time as well. So every time, and that's why they advise you to staircase in bigger chunks rather than doing it, say 10% at a time, because you pay fees every single time you staircase. So that can be a significant cost.
So you pay legal fees, you pay stamp duty, I'm assuming?
Yeah, you pay financial advisor fees if you so wish to have somebody obviously helping and instructing. Yeah.
Well, that's quite a lot, isn't it? Okay, I never knew that. I thought that you'd just be buying the flat at the price that you bought it for.
No. So when and you know when they first value it, that's the amount of mortgage and rent you pay. The rent will then, for me, the rent stayed consistent. But obviously, then every time you want a staircase, you have someone evaluate your flat, and then if it's gone up, the new mortgage is based on the new mortgage on the new valuation of the property is how they do it.
Does the rent stay the same?
So the rent, obviously the rent will go down because if I've now bought, say, from 40 to 60, then I'm only actually now paying the 40% rent. So the rent payments, I think, would remain consistent. I mean, they don't go up or down, but obviously you just pay less because you now own more of the property.
Yeah, sorry. What I meant was if there's a fixed fee of the rent, that doesn't fluctuate in terms of...
No, that doesn't fluctuate. It's the mortgage element that obviously fluctuates, yeah.
Okay, so Adam, hi Adam. What attracted you to shared ownership?
Well, they're pretty similar. I have a long connection with the area that my family's been associated with Ealing for a long time. And I didn't go to the university route, so I ended up working in the area and was living at my parents' house, and basically obviously wanted to move out. And you know, even with saving, I couldn't afford to buy, you know, even just a 1-bedroom studio in Ealing because of the prices. So the shared ownership scheme obviously was a way of accessing the kind of housing market, and from the perspective of kind of saving money and other bits and pieces and, you know, protecting, you know, kind of your future. It seemed like a great idea because, you know, obviously you're getting a mortgage and you're only paying rent on the bit you don't own.
Are you happy with the product, Adam?
To be honest, no. In terms of the product, you know, the housing associations are unfortunately, you know, were at the time when we went on it very immature, and the actual overall experience of dealing with them is appalling. And to this day, it's still been a case. You know, we had 2 different housing associations, you know, that we dealt with. The one we currently obviously rent from in effect, and the other one that we dealt with when the transaction went wrong, and it wasn't a pleasurable experience, but it's not now.
I'm very sorry to hear that. Can I ask you, as well as paying rent and the mortgage, and then on top of that, you've got your bills, electricity, gas, water, all the, you know, day-to-day outgoings, everything else we have to pay, council tax, £200 a month. Are there any other costs involved, like ground rent, service charges, things like that?
Yes, so there are a couple of things of interest. Obviously, the rental part of it does go up based on inflation. So they have increased our rent every year on year with the maximum that they were able to in the contract. So that has slowly been going upwards. Now, obviously, that may vary on each housing association, but certainly the one that we're with, which is headquartered in Ealing, has used the full ability in their contract to increase the rent by inflation and any other means. In terms of the developments, this development we're in here is actually quite small, so we don't have any lifts or things like that, but I have friends that are in other shared ownership developments that have been stung a reasonable amount of money, you know, due to you know, the kind of building controls not being managed properly, and certainly, you know, I have some concerns about this development. We've been paying into a window fund, for example, to replace the windows in 30 years' time. That seems quite a short lifespan for development of this nature, but we have a lot of technology in here to do with solar panels and things, and the reality is the technology doesn't work properly. Subsequently, I suspect that shortly we will get hit with some quite hefty costs in those.
And you have to pay them?
Yes, and the difference is obviously because we part own the development or the units, we effectively inherit all the risks as if you owned it 100%. And that is a big kind of thing that, you know, the big distinction between shared ownership and, say, just renting from a housing association is that, in effect, shared ownership tenants get lumbered with the whole cost of whatever it is, not the percentage cost.
Oh God! So if you owned a flat in that building outright as a private owner in a flat, you'd obviously have maintenance charges and things like that. So as a shared ownership, you don't get charged a percentage of that. You get charged the full amount.
Yes, it doesn't matter what percentage you own. In our contract alone, we were liable for the whole lot. So, for example, that you get things like we have a shared communal solar panel system and things like that. Now, you're relying on the housing association people that put these budgets together to have got the service charge figure correct. And for example, in the development we're in here, we don't have a residents association, so no one has really been challenging them over these charges. And that, and again, the emphasis is on you as the tenant to hold the housing association to account. And as I say, we have gas boilers, for example, and smoke alarms. Okay, that's fine. You get that in any development. But we have this solar panel system that's connected to those things. It's supposed to be environmentally friendly. Yet the housing association and the people who installed it don't know how it works. So
right.
it doesn't inspire confidence, does it?
No. So in theory, it's a great sounding product, but from your experience, Adam, it's a negative one. I was going to ask you what the negative was, but I think you've already said that. Sophie, positives and negatives. I think we've spoken before where you've talked about, we've called them hidden costs, but costs that the housing associations aren't necessarily upfront about. Can you quickly say have you had those in your building? I mean, is yours a tall building, a big building? What were we looking at?
No, mine's only 3 stories, and there are 17 flats in the main building and 4 houses at the back. I think that I agree with what Adam was just saying. I think, we do have a lift, for example. We have electrical gates to get into the car park. Things that are incredibly expensive to have to repair. The cost, it all just hits the service charge, but we get told an annual service charge rate. And then obviously when we have the review at the end of the year, we see that all those additional costs have then been added into the service charge. And they only really tell you that at the end of the year. So even when they come to fix the job, you don't know the cost at the time. And then you get a lovely statement at the end of the year with all of these additional costs. And similarly to Adam as well, they have to make these buildings, as they call them, energy efficient. So similarly, I have solar panels. Again, things that are incredibly expensive to maintain and fix. So I've had the same experience whereby you get quite a hefty bill at the end of the year.
So what you're talking thousands?
So it's thousands, but then obviously they split it amongst the residents. So, it's even simple things, where, when we have cleaners, for example, and, we say to them, okay, actually as a one-off, can you please, get rid of the weeds? All, even those smaller costs they add on, nothing is done as a favor, shall we say. They all get added to the bill, but it does get split, so it's not as bad. But yes, it can be in the thousands in terms of the overall cost.
Oh, that's quite shocking. Okay, so just
to throw in there, I think one of the other concerns about it is you have to, when you look at the competency of the actual housing associations for their repairs, even basic things like changing, we have a security door issue at the moment where the barrels, which are coded keys, have failed spectacularly. We have now probably had, I think it's about 21 visits I've recorded down on that to fix that issue. And you can imagine that each one of those charges, just the engineer to come out, it's got to be 50 quid there. And those charges get applied to this development, and then they get landed to us. Does that make sense? There is no incentive for the housing associations to actually perform their duty of care correctly. I think one other thing just to raise as well is that when we actually moved into this development, their quality control was appalling. So some of the stuff like the fire prevention measures weren't even in place, and it wasn't the housing association that actually analysed that or did that. It was me and the other tenants having to hold them to account, and it is just. I have to say, I warn people very much about shared ownership. Make sure you definitely
read the small print. Do your research
and check it. Yeah.
So the other, so we're just going to move swiftly on to, there's this massive development that's been proposed at on the corner of Manor Road and the Argyle Road, Drayton Bridge Road, on the bridge next to West Ealing Station. So this is it's a 19-story, it's 21-story building. So I think it's got 2 lifts in it. I don't believe it's got any solar panel business going on, but so looking on their website, so they're saying a typical 1-bedroom there would cost £450,000, a typical 2-bedroom with £550,000. Who sets this price? Is it like through a normal estate agent? Do they go around and Gerald, I'm going to throw to you. Do you know who sets the price for the prices of these flats on shared ownerships?
Hi, Justine. I mean, from my understanding, that is set by essentially the owner, the association that's going to be selling these on the shared ownership, and that is one of the issues that we've got, which is that you're highly dependent on that owner, that supplier, to set the price. Now, particularly with these new builds in an area like West Ealing, it can be a bit difficult to establish exactly what the correct price would be. The research that we've done as part of Stop the Towers implies that they've overvalued it by at least 20%, if not more, when we compare like for like high quality new build flat of a similar standard with what they're proposing on Manor Road. It looks like they've gone, way over in terms of the pricing. Now, if it was in a normal market situation, then you could haggle on that. You could just say, well, I'm not paying that, I'll look for somewhere cheaper. But with shared ownership and the limited supply, people can get, bounced into paying the higher price. And also that higher price often gets hidden in the fact that you're only buying a small share of it.
Yeah. Just one other thing to throw in there about that, especially with the mortgage market, with shared ownership, certainly at the time we were doing it, you were limited with only shared ownership available mortgages, and they tended to be set at the interest rate at the time may have been, I can't remember, I think it was about 3 or 4%. I'm pretty sure that our original shared ownership mortgage was about 7%. It was definitely considerably higher than what was available at the market at the time. Yeah. That may have changed, but certainly, that is also going to be majorly impacted over the value of these properties. If they're overvalued, then you are getting, to be honest, screwed. So
very quickly, just want to move on to the Manor Road one in a big way, because this is actually we need to kind of scrutinise this very quickly. So the housing association come up with the price, and I understand that they get paid. The flats get bought and sold, or they get the money for the flats before they sold them. Is that right?
It depends on the relationship and who's buying and selling, but the developer essentially can step away pretty quickly, because they'll be paid by the association that will be owning it.
Right.
So let's say if you've got a housing association, they'll pay the developer. Developer's going to walk away. They're taking virtually no risk in this. And also, if people are buying them at an inflated rate, then the housing association is taking almost no risk in this. All of that risk gets heaped onto the buyers.
Right. So I'm just looking at, so for example, Thames Valley Metropolitan Housing, the people that are looking after the 55 West Tower, so they've given us, there's an example on their website of a monthly spend for a teacher and a nurse, 2 key workers there, who they're targeting these flats at, with a joint annual income of £57,000. So from that, they say 10% deposit, 13.5 grand. Their rent is £602 per calendar month. The mortgage is about £555 per calendar month. Again, that's not guaranteed because no one knows what interest rate they're going to get it at. And the service charge is roughly about £270 per calendar month. So that's quite a lot of money a month. Actually, it's quite that's like about £1,400 a month before you even pay bills, council tax, all the other stuff. And then if there's any service charge or maintenance that has to go on, and both Adam and Sophie just saying both of their buildings are quite low rise. So this is be a high rise building. I mean, I would assume that would get huge maintenance bills. But so, for example, Sophie, you talked about the fact that the flats.
Justine, can I jump in there, because
Yeah.
something I picked up on earlier. Sophie mentioned that she went in at 40%, which is a fairly standard value from what she says. If you look at the small print on the Metropolitan Thames Valley application, their pricing's based on 25% equity, which is really very low.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's quite expensive, and it might be just about affordable, but you could see how it could be very difficult to staircase your way out if you're starting at 25%. And I think that they've really had to massage those figures hard to make them look affordable to a teacher.
Yeah, exactly. So what I was going to say was, because obviously the proximity of the Crossrail station, which is this magic carpet which takes you into Bond Street in 11 minutes from West Ealing, when it fully opens, I think I'm not going to say when it fully opens because they change all the time. When it fully opens, surely the flats in Manor Road will suddenly rocket.
I think they may well, they would do. And as I think Sophie and Adam have said, that puts owning the home even further out of reach of these tenants. If you've gone in at 25% and then the 75% that you don't own suddenly starts to go up in value, that may make it very difficult to buy up that extra part. And the other thing is that, as you say, if the service charges start to go up and the rent starts to go up, you may find it increasingly difficult to actually keep up the payments. And this is something that Sophie and Adam might be able to talk about, which is that you don't have the normal rights that you would have as a tenant or a mortgage based owner on shared ownership. If you default on it, you quite possibly lose all the money you've put up into it.
Yes. So obviously well, to be honest, it's a totally grey area for us in that sense. It was never discussed by the housing association, and well, effectively the housing association had paid some salespeople, if you know what I mean. And all they were interested in was selling the property to you. And there was no, one of the other things to raise about this is that it's an interesting concept about what shared ownership's for. My idea, my understanding of it, or the concept I thought originally, was the idea of shared ownership was this kind of stepping stone ladder to get people onto the property market. But what seems to have happened, in Sophie's case, Sophie now owns 100% of her property, which is great, okay, but that now means that shared ownership property doesn't exist for someone else. So it raises a question about the concept of shared ownership overall, in the sense that it almost seems it has never been designed to be that permanent stepping stone for people. It lets people get to 100% if they could, but in this instance of the Manor Road scheme, so I hadn't actually really looked at these figures until you said them, and I wouldn't touch. I would, if that was the case now, we wouldn't even have been able to access this scheme.
So over £500,000 for a 2-bedroom flat. So basically, in a way, the higher price hike, and the increase in property price can increase in value. And as Gerald was saying, they're just taking 25% equity in the building. That does actually cut out key workers like nurses and teachers, and unless they suddenly become, top of their. I mean, my mum was a nurse for many years, and I don't think she could have afforded.
Well, Justine, I think the thing with the key workers is they might be able to buy their way into it, but they might find themselves in a massive trap, owning a very small amount of the equity, struggling to keep up the repayment, and finding it very difficult to sell it on.
I was about to throw out to that, one of the pitfalls which you didn't discuss is that if you are never going to be able to get to 100% in a shared ownership property, your market to resell is actually quite limited at the moment. For example, in our contract here, we have to allow the housing association first dibs on putting it on their website to sell it. Then after a period of time, I think it's 4 weeks, we're allowed to go onto the open market. But we have to find someone that's eligible for shared ownership. And that eligibility varies between housing associations.
It's interesting. It's interesting that you say that, because even owning 100% now, I still have to give the housing association first refusal. So as in, they basically have to have it first, unless I pay them a fee. I don't know how much that would be. I imagine a few £100 for me to take that that away from them, and then I'd be allowed to sell it to whoever I wanted. But it's interesting that they still maintain that control, even though I now own all of the flat, but technically they're still the landlord of the building, so they still maintain that right.
Wow.
That is really interesting, because that and obviously I only know from, you know, I currently own 40% of this, so I'm still, you know, we haven't staircased. And one of the reasons for not staircasing is that unless we could get to 100%, you do feel like you would be landlocked, as in you could not move.
Yeah.
And obviously, as you're well aware, you make life decisions, and sometimes life changes, as for example of what's currently happening in 2020.
Exactly. So very quickly, so Thames Valley Metropolitan Housing have committed to entering a nominations agreement with Ealing Council and a £60,000 cap on household incomes for London shared ownership for the first 3 months of marketing, to ensure that residents from Ealing get priority. So that's 3 months of marketing. Do they get the priority and the 60 grand cap? So what happens when that 3 months period is over? Does it become a big free for all? Can anyone apply for one?
Well, it's very difficult to say what will happen. We can say what's happened in the past, which is that it tends to just turn into a bit of a free for all, where the developer kind of plays chicken with the local authority. And at that point, it's very difficult for the local authority to exercise any kind of control over it. So certainly in other schemes, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the number of shared ownerships drops even during the build process.
That's if they get planning permission.
If they got planning permission. Certainly that's been the pattern in Ealing, where a developer has started the build with a relatively large number of affordable housing, and then as the build goes on or circumstances change, that reduces and reduces from various excuses until eventually there's very few. But with this one, I could easily see a situation where nobody wants to buy them and it goes out to the open market. Affordability goes out the window, and these are just being sold off to foreign investors. I'm not saying it will happen, but I could easily see that as a plausible scenario.
Yeah, so what is currently being proposed is supposed to be 100% genuinely affordable property. Probably isn't going to be, and will eventually be 100% unaffordable, because the London Living Rent, that scheme is for middle income earners only, exclusive. That's for the people in the private market renting to move in, heavily subsidised rent, so they can then save money to then put deposit and own their flat on a shared ownership deal. The idea is that everyone eventually staircases up or gets priced out of the market and has to move. The idea is that whole building will then become 100% privately owned. I just wanted to very quickly there was obviously, we had over 2,500 objections on the portal, the Ealing Council planning portal, against this development. And one of them was quite interesting, from one of the local councillors. It's just quite an interesting thing that this person said. They said the 100% affordable claim is inaccurate. There are no affordable units to rent. They're all London Living Rent and shared ownership, which most public sector workers cannot afford. As a nurse, I'm particularly concerned about the large amount of shared ownership properties within it. A presentation by our own cabinet member, this is Ealing Council, stated that they are not suitable for all of Ealing. And this is especially true where there is likely to be a significant increase in the market value of a property, as in this development when the Crossrail station is open, meaning that the shared ownership element will become increasingly unaffordable and therefore return to the open market. So that's the concerns of local councillors as well. I mean, Gerald.
Justine, it wasn't just the local council, and there's a very astute observation there. But
that's just what I picked out.
Landmark Chambers had a look at this for Stop the Towers. They're a leading development barristers. And when they looked at it and looked at the definitions of affordability, they were clear that this cannot be described as affordable.
Interesting. So Ben, will we then see these flats marketed abroad in Hong Kong and Beijing, like many of the other new buildings in Ealing?
Well, that's certainly what's happened at Dickens Yard.
Well, the BT site's being marketed in Hong Kong, and Friary Park in Acton is being marketed, and Filmworks is being marketed abroad. Is Ealing up for sale to foreign investors? Could your neighbourhood be up for sale next? I mean,
well, I think that's the pattern of it, Justine, where it's described in terms of solving London's housing crisis, but I do wonder whether it's actually solving Hong Kong and Beijing's housing crisis.
Okay, I think that's a whole new podcast. Any final words, Sophie?
I think on the point that was just mentioned, actually, and I think Dickens Yard is a great example. And I think, I find it really quite, soul destroying when you know that these units are bought up and then for half of the year no one actually lives there. And as Joe just said about, the housing crisis, you've got people that are desperate for homes, and then you have these flats that are empty for half the year. And I just think it's a really kind of, sad indictment that this happens. And the fact that we, Ealing Council are not learning from it, and they just keep repeating the same thing, over and over again.
Adam, any final words?
Yeah, so I just, there is obviously a need for affordable housing across the spectrums, but this scheme at Manor Road isn't going to deliver that. And there's enough examples of that going on now. For example, this 3-month cap, for the waiting list, for the Ealing thing, it's not. 3 months isn't even enough time to get that marketed properly to the people. So
yeah, I mean, that's just marketing. I mean, it's not. It's just marketing.
And especially now with the state of the economy going forward, the scheme is highly unaffordable for anyone, a key worker or anyone that's got a job, really, quite frankly. And that's before you get started with what do they do if they have a family later on and they're stuck in a 1-bedroom unit and they only own 25% over 30 years.
And we go into lockdown.
The whole thing.
You go into lockdown, you have to stand on your balcony and look at the railway line.
Don't laugh, I was doing that over lockdown.
Well, it may be looking over Drayton Green Road.
Oh, well, but then your view will be blocked by all those other tower blocks coming. Gerald, final words.
Well, I think one thing is we've come down quite hard on shared ownership, and I'd say that certainly from the Stop the Towers perspective, we are not against shared ownership as a basic concept. It can work for some people in some circumstances, but we feel in this case, this is just not a situation where shared ownership is going to work. And it's going to actually put the people that you're trying to help at massive risk. It's just plain wrong.
And likewise with the London Living Rent Scheme, I mean, they are not available to anybody on Ealing's social housing list. It's a scheme exclusive for middle income earners. And again, that is an incentive to get people to save money. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we've had conversations with the Housing Association before. And we've said, what if you lose?
When I've been out talking to people in the street, one of the reasons they say they favour these tower developments is they think that their sons and their daughters, their nieces, their nephews are going to get an affordable house out of it. So they feel that it might just about be worth it. But I think they're entirely wrong. It's been completely missold to them as a concept. Yeah. This is almost certainly for people on much higher incomes from out of the borough. It's not for Ealing residents.
No. Guys, thank you so much. Thank you for your time, and thank you for taking part.
Okay, thanks, Justine.
Thank you, Justine.
Bye.
Thank you, Justine. Bye.